guys, Free Play Frank. Today I'm going to be showing you part 1 of the CMC Vintage Lathe Restoration project. And then later I'm going to play one of my favorite Thin Lizzy songs, The Boys Are Back in Town. Tonight my shout out goes to Kieth Fenner. Now Keith is a machinist, he has his own shop, he's in the northeast of the States, I can't remember which state. But he does a lot of really interesting projects, some really heavy duty stuff, and it's really quite amazing watching how he figures out how to do all this stuff. Great channel if you're into machining. So let's do this. Alright, here we are in the shop. This is the antique lathe that I'm going to be restoring. It's made by the CMC Canadian Machine Corporation from Galt, Ontario. And the serial number is 5056. And it's an old line shaft machine. You can see the pulleys. So I used to have another set of pulleys mounted on the ceiling that would turn by a motor that ran the whole shop, and then a big flat belt would come down and run the lathe from one shop, from one motor. So I'm going to be converting this to an electric motor, and that's what this video is going to be about. You can see I've got the carriage moved all the way back to the headstock as far as I can, because when I make the mounts for the motor I want to make sure that the carriage still clears. Now what we're going to do is we're going to mount the motor above this pulley here so that it doesn't take up any more floor space. I've seen people mount them on the back of the machine, hanging off the back of the machine, but I want to keep the floor space to a minimum. So what we're going to do is I've added this bracket to the bottom of the lathe to the bolt hole where it used to attach to the floor, and since this machine's so heavy I don't see any need to bolt it down. It weighs about 4,000 pounds, so I can't see it moving too far. So the plan is I'm going to weld brackets coming up off of that bracket until it gets up above the height of where I need it to be. And then I have this with this bolt here and these two dowel pins here. And I'm not sure what this was for, but I'm imagining that this was probably what they originally used to engage and disengage the clutch by making the belt slip. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a big long lever and figure out exactly how long it has to be and what the angles are and so on, so that I can make it work properly, so I can push it on and off and disengage it safely. So we got two mounting points from here. I'm going to mount from back here. There's going to be a flat plate drilled out to accept this hole and these three holes, and then a bolt or nut on this big bolt here to hold that on, and then the lever is going to be installed on this part of the bolt here. And then there's going to be another piece of steel coming up off the floor, coming up to about around this height somewhere, whatever it has to be. I go around to the other side of the machine, and I've done the same on this side. I've mounted a piece of steel to the bottom on the mounting hole, and there's a hole that's been tapped and drilled by a previous owner, so I use that as well. I want to try and keep the machine stock so that if it ever gets sold to some collector someday they can return it to stock. I'm not going to modify anything that isn't absolutely necessary. So I'm going to run some steel coming up off of those, and it'll give me a 4-point mounting to mount my motor. Now here's the motor. It's a 5 horsepower A.O. Smith single phase 1750 RPM. And what I've done here is I've made this bracket, and you have this extra shaft here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it with two belts from this pulley to this pulley. It's got a 3.5-inch pulley on the motor and a 12-inch pulley on this shaft. So that's going to mean that this shaft is going to turn at 545 RPM. And I've mounted both of those on a bracket, and then the plan is to mount that above the lathe on what I was just explaining. Okay, on the motor you have See how this motor is mounted at the end of the motor? Most motors have a bracket bolted to the side with 4 bolts that bolts it down, but this one's held on with 4 of these holes here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount it the same as they mount a power steering pump. I have here an old Ford power steering pump. And you can see that they have this bracket here is bolted onto the front of the pump with these bolts here. The pulley extends out past it. And then you have this part here where there's a long bolt that goes through here and it bolts into the front of the motor. So I'm going to make a bracket like this to attach that motor to my lathe. And here's all the pieces I made. This is the part that's going to bolt to the front of the motor. And there's the hole where it's going to go through, and then this piece here is going to be attached like that. And then we have these gussets here I'm going to weld on here for extra strength, and these pieces here are going to be welded onto this frame to help locate the motor, like one here, one there, and one there, just to keep the motor from moving around if the bolts come loose. One of my favorite tricks is when I make fabricating out of steel is to make a cardboard template. That way you're trimming the cardboard instead of the steel. The brown marks are, I put oil on the front of the motor so that I can push this up against the motor to transfer the holes, so I could drill the holes. And the big hole in the middle is just so that I can get the motor off the bracket without taking a pulley off. Okay, I'll come back after I get this all welded up. Okay, it's welded up. Now next step is these are the brackets that are going to be welded onto here. So I made this bracket out of 3" by 1.5" channel, the motor and this intermediate shaft mounts on. So now these brackets here are what's going to attach it to that, and then I got the shaft that goes through like this, slides all the way through. So that's how that's going to work. So I'll get this mounted up to the motor and positioned on there. Okay, got that welded up now. Got the belt tensioned fairly tight. Next step now is I've got this lifted up by my engine hoist, and I'm trying to find the center. I got this piece of pipe underneath the frame. So I want to get the center of it, so because I want to use the weight of the motor to tension the main belt. So this seems to be pretty close here. I can push down on that with about 10 pounds of force. So if we slide this pipe back slightly, bear with me. Alright, I slid it back about 1 inch. Okay, that takes probably about 20 pounds of force to push it down, so I would say that's pretty good, right about there. See, this chalk mark here was the center of my intermediate, whatever you call this frame. I don't know what you call that frame, but so I'm a little bit past that. I'm about 1.5 inches past that. So the next thing I gotta do is I gotta make another frame that mounts underneath this one. It goes down like a teepee or an A-frame shape. Pieces coming off this way, and there's going to be a pivot point here, and then that frame is going to attach to my lathe.
Guess you just got back today. Those wild-eyed boys that have been away, man, you haven't had much to say. Man, I still think them cats are great. They've been asking if you've been around, where you was and where you could be found. Told them you make a living downtown, driving all the old men crazy. The boys are back in town, shaking. I said the boys are back in town. The boys are back in town. The boys are back in town. Chick they used to dance a lot, but she'd be on the floor shaking what she's got. Now when I tell you she was cool, she was red hot. I mean she was steaming. One night over at Johnny's place, well this chick got up and she slapped Johnny's face. Man, we fell about the place. She don't wanna know, forget her. The boys are back in town, shaking. I said the boys are back in town. The boys are back in town. The boys are back in town. Spread the word around. Guess who's back in town again? Spread the word around. Friday night they'll be dressed to kill. Down at Dino's Bar and Grill. Drinks will flow and blood will spill. Boys wanna fight, you better fucking let 'em. That jukebox in the corner blasting out my favorite songs. Nights are getting warm and won't be long. Not until summer comes. Now that the boys are here again, the boys are back in town, shaking. I said the boys are back in town. The boys are back in town. The boys are back in town. Back in town again. They're hanging down at Dino's. Yeah, baby. Boys are back in town. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. Take care.